The courtroom smelled like polished wood and old money, two things my family had always worshipped, but never truly earned. I sat quietly at the end of the table while my half-sister's attorney delivered his performance with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no. "This court must act immediately," he announced, pacing just enough to command attention. The respondent exploited a dying man. She isolated him. She manipulated him. She cannot be trusted with an estate worth nearly $8 million. Every word landed like it was designed to bruise. My sister, Leela, dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief that probably cost more than my first car. Her sobs were delicate, curated, sadness with a budget. Across the aisle, my parents leaned forward, eager, hungry. They wanted blood, preferably mine. The judge finally looked at me. "Mems Hale," he said evenly. "Do you object?" I didn't rise. I didn't speak right away. I simply checked my watch. "Not yet," I said. "I'm waiting for someone." Confusion rippled through the room. Before the judge could respond, the heavy doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Not dramatically, no cinematic slam, but with the dull efficiency of someone who had opened doors like this for decades. The man who entered didn't look like he belonged in my family's version of power. No tailored suit, no polished arrogance. Just a gray jacket that didn't quite fit and a briefcase scarred with age and use. He didn't look at us. Not once. He walked straight to the clerk, placed a sealed envelope on the desk, and turned to the bench. "Your Honor," he said, voice dry and precise. "I represent the Trust Services Division of North Meridian Bank. We are the acting trustee of the Hale Family Trust." The air changed, not emotionally, structurally. Like gravity had recalibrated. Leela's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection. We were never notified of any corporate trustee. This is a probate." "Sit down," the judge said, already opening the envelope. Paper tore. My mother's fingers tightened in her lap. She kept glancing at me like she was waiting for the panic she'd trained into me since childhood. It never came. Because I'd been there 3 years earlier. I'd driven my grandfather to that bank. I'd waited while he signed. I knew exactly what that envelope held. The judge scanned the document, then looked directly at Leela. "Ms. Hale," he asked, "were you aware your grandfather transferred all assets into an irrevocable trust prior to his death?" Leela laughed, sharp and brittle. "He wasn't competent. That's why we're here." The judge didn't raise his voice. "The trust certification states otherwise. And it includes a no contest clause." He adjusted his glasses and read aloud. "Any beneficiary who challenges the validity of this trust, or the mental capacity of the grantor, shall immediately forfeit all interest therein." Silence swallowed the room. My father's face drained of color. He was a man who intimidated servers and contractors, who'd built his identity on bullying people into compliance. But now he looked small, because contracts don't flinch. Banks don't negotiate feelings. Leela's lawyer stammered. "We withdraw the motion. It's already on record." The judge replied calmly. "The trust stands. Emergency control is denied." My sister turned toward me, eyes wild. "You knew," she hissed. "You let us do this." I met her stare. "I told you to wait." They thought I was just the quiet caregiver. The disposable one. They forgot what I did for a living. I didn't need to fight them. I just needed them to sign their own names. And they did. As the courtroom buzzed with panic, I felt the past claw its way back, because this wasn't the first time my family had decided I was the price they'd pay to survive, and it wouldn't be the last lie they told. Not today. While my family whispered frantically to their attorney, I leaned back in the hard wooden chair and let the noise blur. Panic has a sound. It's thin and frantic, like paper tearing too fast. I'd heard it my entire life. Usually, it came from them while I stayed quiet and paid the bill. Watching them unravel felt surreal. Like seeing a building collapse in slow motion, you notice the cracks long before anyone hears the crash. That's when the memory came back. Not the courtroom, the kitchen. 15 years earlier, the air smelled like cheap whiskey and disinfectant. I was 14, fresh from emergency dental surgery, my jaw swollen and aching so badly it felt like it had its own pulse. Cotton packed my mouth. My head throbbed every time I swallowed. The surgery cost $12,000. That same week, my parents' construction company collapsed. They sat me at the table like it was a tribunal. My mother cried immediately, loud, uneven sobs that felt rehearsed even then. My father paced, glass in hand, sloshing amber liquid onto his knuckles as if anger needed fuel. "We lost everything," he shouted, slamming his palm down. "The house, the contracts, all of it." Then he pointed at me. "If we hadn't wasted that money on her teeth," he snapped to my mother, as though I wasn't sitting there, "we could have floated the loan." I didn't understand finance. I didn't understand bankruptcy. But I understood blame. I believed him. I sat there with blood in my mouth and took responsibility for the collapse of a grown man's business. I absorbed it completely. I became careful. Smaller, quieter. The child who costs too much. They told that story everywhere, at holidays, at dinners, to relatives who nodded sympathetically. Would still be comfortable if it weren't for her surgery. It was just bad timing. She drained us. It became family folklore. A sharp little stone they could throw whenever they needed a reason for their failures. Then my sister was born. 3 years after the collapse, right when my father somehow secured another loan, she arrived clean of history, untouched by debt or blame. She got ballot lessons, tutors, encouragement, applause. I got reminders. I grew up believing I owed them. That my existence came with a balance sheet I could never quite pay down. So I tried. In my 20s, I covered rent when my father forgot about quarterly taxes. I bought groceries when my mother spent the food budget on networking lunches. I wired money with no questions, convinced that if I paid enough, blood enough, eventually the ledger would even out. It never did. They didn't thank me. They expected me. It wasn't until I started working for someone who actually understood numbers that I finally did the math. $12,000 doesn't bankrupt a multi-million-dollar company. Fraud does. Mismanagement does. Treating business accounts like personal vacation funds does. They didn't lose everything because of my surgery. They lost it because they were reckless. And because narcissists don't survive accountability. They need somewhere to dump their shame. I was the dump site. Back in the courtroom, my father caught my eye. For a moment, his expression softened into something familiar, expectant, demanding. The look he used when he needed me to fix things. He mouthed something. Probably help. Probably you owe us. I held his gaze and didn't blink. I wasn't 14 anymore. I wasn't swollen and silent and desperate to be forgiven. I wasn't the girl who carried their failures like unpaid invoices. You made me carry your shame for 15 years, I thought. You wanted a burden. Now you have one. Across the aisle, my sister went very still. The kind of stillness that comes right before panic erupts. She was doing the math now. Real math, not emotional math. The kind that calculates mortgages, lifestyles, and the sudden disappearance of $8 million. Her world was starting to crack. And she was about to try to blame me again. But this time, she didn't just cry or accuse. She went nuclear. And what she claimed next could have destroyed me if I hadn't prepared for it years in advance. My sister stood so abruptly her chair screeched across the courtroom floor. He wasn't in his right mind. She cried, turning toward the gallery like she was addressing an audience instead of a judge. She controlled everything. The phone. The locks. She kept him from us. Murmurs rippled through the room. It was a smart move. Dangerous. Allegations like that didn't just threaten money, they froze estates, triggered investigations, ruined reputations, elder abuse, undue influence. The words courts take seriously because they have to. The judge's expression darkened. My father seized the opening. It's true, Your Honor, he boomed, ignoring his lawyer's frantic tug at his sleeve. She barred us from the house. Last Christmas Eve, we went to see my father. We stood outside in the cold, begging. She locked us out. Wouldn't even let a son see his dying father on Christmas. Gasps from the gallery. It was a good story. Simple, cruel, easy to digest. I didn't move. The judge looked at me. Ems, Hale, do you wish to respond? I kept my hands folded, my face neutral. Reacting too fast would make me look defensive, emotional, unstable. That's what they wanted, because inside my head, I was already back in that hallway. December 24th, 11:30 p.m. My grandfather lay in a hospital bed set up in the living room. High flow oxygen hissed with every breath, the machine struggling as much as he was. His lungs were failing. Every loud noise spiked his heart rate. Every unfamiliar sound sent panic racing through him. I was measuring his medication when the pounding started. Not a knock, a fist. Repeated. Angry, I crept to the door and checked the peephole. My parents stood there, Santa hats crooked on their heads, wine glasses still in hand. They were laughing. Loud. Unsteady. They hadn't come from home. They'd come from a party. Open up. My father shouted, slurring. We know he's in there. My grandfather grabbed my wrist, his fingers trembling. Don't, he whispered. Please. I don't want them to see me like this. His heart monitor began to beep faster. I locked the deadbolt, turned off the porch light, sat on the floor beside his bed, and held his hand until the pounding stopped and their car finally peeled away. That was the night they called abuse. Back in the courtroom, my sister wiped her eyes dramatically. She isolated him. She brainwashed him. That trust isn't his, it's hers. My father nodded vigorously. She laughed at us through the door. A lie told often enough starts to sound like memory. The judge leaned forward. These are serious allegations. My sister's lawyer jumped in. Your Honor, if the decedent was isolated or coerced, the trust must be suspended pending investigation. The room shifted again, this time toward danger. My palms were slick with sweat, but I stayed silent. Because I needed them committed. On the record. Under oath. The judge turned to the man in the gray suit. Does the trustee have any evidence regarding these claims of isolation? The trustee didn't rush. He opened his briefcase slowly and removed a worn, leather-bound notebook. The spine was cracked. The pages warped with age. Yes, Your Honor, he said evenly. We do. He placed the book on the clerk's desk. My grandfather's journal. My sister stopped crying. This record, the trustee continued, does not show isolation, it shows abandonment. He paired the journal with a thick stack of documents. We are submitting 5 years of itemized phone records for the decedent's cellular account. The courtroom went silent. The judge nodded once. Proceed. The trustee opened the journal to a marked page. Entry dated March 12th. He read. My daughter's birthday. Called to sing. Went to voicemail. No call back. He lifted a phone bill. Outgoing call. 4 seconds. No return calls that month. My mother flinched. Page after page followed. Missed visits. Broken promises. Holidays marked by absence. Every excuse documented in shaky handwriting. Then the trustee turned to the final tab. December 24th. The room held its breath. Roland 45 p.m. Family arrived intoxicated, pounding on the door. It frightened me. My heart rate spiked. I asked her not to let them in. The trustee closed the book. AT&T records confirm a 911 call initiated 3 minutes later and terminated when the disturbance ended. My father shrank into his chair. The judge exhaled slowly. They didn't see a loving son locked out, the trustee said. They saw a dying man being protected. The lie had collapsed. But the most dangerous accusation was still hanging in the air. And now they were about to claim my grandfather never had the mental capacity to sign the trust at all. The courtroom felt colder after the journal was entered into evidence. Not emotionally, clinically, like the room itself had decided this was no longer a family dispute, but a matter of facts, dates, and consequences. My sister's lawyer recovered first. He always did. Your Honor, he said smoothly, journals are not medical evaluations. An elderly man on pain medication can write clearly while still lacking the legal capacity to make binding decisions. There it was. The real target. My sister leaned forward, seizing the moment. He was confused. He mixed up names. He didn't understand what he was signing. My father nodded emphatically. She put the pen in his hand. The judge turned toward the trustee. Does the bank have documentation regarding the grantor's mental capacity at the time the trust was executed? The trustee looked at me. That was my cue. I stood for the first time. Yes, Your Honor, I said calmly, because I knew this day would come. Objections flew instantly. My sister's lawyer nearly tripped over himself trying to stop me. The judge raised a hand. Let her speak. I took a breath. I didn't just care for my grandfather. I managed his affairs, his calendar, his medications, his finances, and I understood that the moment he passed, someone would claim he was incompetent. My sister scoffed. You're not a doctor. No, I agreed. That's why I hired two. The trustee opened his briefcase again and withdrew a folder thicker than the last. Exhibit D, he said, affidavits of capacity. The pages were passed forward. 2 independent forensic psychiatrists, the trustee continued, evaluated the grantor 2 hours before the trust amendment was signed. Both concluded he was fully oriented, cognitively intact, and aware of his assets and family relationships. My sister went pale. These evaluations were video recorded. The trustee added. The recordings have been submitted to the court. My father stood halfway out of his chair. Those doctors cost thousands a day. They do, I said quietly. My sister's voice cracked. You couldn't afford that. I didn't pay them. The trustee slid 2 canceled checks onto the table. Payment was issued directly from the grantor's account. Signed by him. Memo line reads capacity evaluation, cleared. Silence slammed into the room. The judge's voice dropped several degrees. Ms. Hale. You and your counsel have repeatedly asserted the grantor lacked capacity. Yes, my sister whispered, realizing too late what she'd done. You did so under oath? The judge continued. Despite contemporaneous medical evaluations proving otherwise, the word hung in the air like a blade. Perjury. The judge said flatly. My sister let out a sound that wasn't quite a sob, and since this petition sought to seize control of assets based on that claim. The judge added, the court is also concerned about attempted fraud. The gavel struck once. The petition is dismissed with prejudice. The no contest clause is hereby enforced. My sister collapsed back into her chair. $8 million vanished in a single sentence. The judge wasn't finished. A sanctions hearing will be scheduled. The trustee will retain full authority. Any further attempts to interfere will be referred to the appropriate authorities. My parents looked like they'd aged a decade in 30 seconds. My father opened his mouth, out of habit, more than courage, but no sound came out. For the first time in my life, no one expected me to fix it. The hearing adjourned. The courtroom erupted into frantic motion, but I stayed seated for a moment longer, letting it settle. Not victory, not revenge, closure. As I stood to leave, my sister lunged toward me, grabbing my arm hard enough to hurt. "You did this," she hissed. I didn't pull away. "Let go." She tightened her grip. I looked at the trustee. Add assault to the list. Her hand dropped instantly. Outside, in the parking lot, my parents tried bargaining. Appeals. Family. Splitting what little was left. I looked at my father and repeated his words from years ago. "We lost it all because of you?" "No," I said. "You lost it because you used me to keep the lights on?" I unlocked my car. My mother wailed behind me that they had nothing. I turned the key and met my father's eyes one last time. "You're right," I said. "You don't?" And I drove away. But the story didn't end when I left the courthouse, because the fallout came fast, brutal, and exactly the way my grandfather planned it. 3 weeks after the hearing, my phone rang while I was sitting in my grandfather's study. The room still smelled faintly of his aftershave and old paper. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, catching dust motes in the air. I hadn't changed much since he passed. Some spaces don't want to be rushed. The transfer is complete, the trustee said. Liquid assets have been deposited. Property deeds are recorded. The court has entered the final order. I thanked him and ended the call. Just like that, it was done. The money didn't feel like a win. It felt like silence after a storm. Like a noise that had been screaming in my ears for decades had finally stopped. The fallout, however, didn't stop with me. My sister's legal bills crossed 6 figures before the sanctions hearing even concluded. By the time it ended, she was responsible for more than she'd ever earned on her own. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that she'd begun quietly asking friends about bankruptcy attorneys. Apparently, losing access to unlimited funds forces uncomfortable math. My parents fared worse. During discovery, auditors noticed inconsistencies in their old business filings, numbers that never quite added up, debts that didn't align with reported losses. What started as curiosity turned into a formal inquiry. Then an audit. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had spent years blaming me for their collapse. Turns out the collapse had been documented all along. I didn't attend the hearings. I didn't answer their calls. For the first time, none of it was my responsibility. In the study, the leather-bound journal sat open on the desk. My grandfather's handwriting wandered near the end, still legible, still deliberate. The final entry wasn't about money. It wasn't about punishment. It was about relief. He wrote that he'd finally seen the pattern. Who showed up? Who didn't? Who called only when they needed something? Who stayed when there was nothing left to take? He wrote that he wasn't leaving me wealth. He was leaving me protection. I closed the book gently. For years, I'd carried an invisible ledger in my head. Every meal I paid for. Every rent check. Every apology I offered for things I didn't cause. I thought if I kept paying, eventually I'd earn peace. But peace isn't purchased. It's claimed. I opened my phone and scrolled to my contacts. Dad, Mom, sister. I didn't block them. I deleted them. One by one. They weren't family anymore. They were just names attached to debts that no longer belonged to me. That night, for the first time in my adult life, I slept without rehearsing conversations that would never happen. Without bracing for requests disguised as emergencies. Without guilt humming in the background. A week later, I changed the locks. Not because I was afraid, because I was done opening doors for people who only knocked when they wanted something. The money will last. That's what money does. But the real inheritance wasn't financial. It was the permission to stop explaining myself, to stop paying for other people's failures, to stop mistaking survival for obligation. They used to say I was the burden. They were wrong. I was the balance. And when I finally closed the ledger, everything else fell exactly where it belonged. Because some inheritances don't come in envelopes or accounts. They come in the moment you realize you were never the problem. And you never have to open that gate again.